Hey guys, quick intro for the show. We have a real treat for you today. If you like conversations that talk about stuff that you don't already know about, then you're going to love this show because we're going to take you to a place where you're going to experience something that you probably haven't even heard about today. Our guest today is Lindsay Briner. She is a neuropsychologist, researcher, executive coach, and TransTech consultant. What the hell's TransTech? You're about to find out. Her foundational background is in cutting-edge consciousness studies and enlightenment in the brain. Her current research focus is in societal implications of the transformation of technology industry in response to the existential and catastrophic risks society is currently faced with. This conversation, the first part is amazing, and then the second part goes a little sideways into a tangent of military intelligence connections with TransTech. Really interesting stuff. We're going to throw that up on Patreon, patreon.com/TSAW. Love you guys. Here's the episode.
Two Seals and a Walrus.
Welcome to Two Seals and a Walrus. We're having a fun time. Our friend Ben is out because he might or might not have COVID, so we're just doing it with one seal and one walrus today. But I wanted to invite a longtime friend of the show, but first-time guest onto the show. Her name's Lindsay Briner. She's out on the left coast, and she is all in the really cool business of expansion of consciousness in multiple disciplines, I would say. Is that accurate? Give us a little synopsis of your story and what you do and what your expertise is in and all the little things that you have your fingers in.
Yeah, it's definitely an intersection of many things. I started in transpersonal counseling psychology, and so I do a lot of coaching, similar to the mind hacking happiness stuff, like awakening coaching, and I combine meditation techniques and positive psychology, and then a lot of identifying limiting belief systems and helping people rewire them. And then while I was working on my PhD under Jeffrey Martin, who I believe you've interviewed here before too, I was his intern at the TransTech lab, Transformative Technology lab in Palo Alto, and became a part of this very niche industry in Silicon Valley called TransTech. And it's about basically any kind of company that leverages tech for human well-being. And so I became a specialist in different types of technologies that support mental and emotional well-being, and started doing consulting, and have really taken some more research in that direction. So I do a lot of research, coaching, consulting, and then, as you know, I also worked with a physicist and got into quantum theory and all that stuff too. So I have a unique background for sure.
Man, so TransTech, talk to me, like the type of technology on the low end of that, where people might be able to understand what's going on with TransTech, would be an example of maybe the Muse headband or something like that, like a piece of technology that assists you to increase your ability to meditate better or longer or deeper, etc., to get you into a space. But that's where it kind of starts, right? I mean, there's a lot more technology that's being developed to help people expand their consciousness and things like that. And you've been involved in that, right? You've been to the TransTech, I guess there's a conference out there in California that happens. How often does that happen? What's that like? What kind of cool stuff have you seen? Because Jeff Martin, like you said, you were under Jeff Martin, or studying under Jeff Martin for a little while in his lab. He has said that he would zap our brains, the two seals and a walrus brains. He wants to get us into his lab and create us a guinea pig scenario to zap us into bliss, I guess. What kind of stuff goes on out there? Tell us about that, because I don't think any of our audience understands that there's a whole movement. What's going on out there?
So yeah, the TransTech conference has been going on for, I think, 6 years now. And I was kind of there from the start, behind the scenes, helping Jeffrey Martin and Nicole Bradford kind of organize it and run it back when they started it. And I've been every year. And I mean, TransTech can range. There's such a wide range of different types of technology, from like the Muse headset is a great example, which is neurofeedback for meditation, right? But then it could be just like a meditation app is considered a TransTech, or different types of virtual reality program that support or claim to support human well-being. So virtual reality, and then there's a lot of brain stimulation technologies that have actually been around for a really long time, that have just now kind of probably because of the TransTech movement, become popularized again, which is like TDCS and TACS, which are two electrodes that they're called montages. You put them in different areas on the skull or your head, and depending on what your goal is, the military uses it for teaching people how to shoot a target. A lot of gamers use it when they're playing a new video game. When you're learning a new task, it can help in a different montage for memory, a different montage for meditation.
Is that what they use to train people reading imagery to find missile silos?
Train what?
So there was a tech used that I could never remember what it used, but they used some methodology or mechanism when they were training folks to actually look at satellite imagery, and it's incredibly hard to actually interpret this type of imagery and actually identify the thing you're trying to find, like a missile silo. And they use something to expedite the training process like fourfold. I didn't know if you ever came across anything like that, or
you can use it for learning any new task. And it's usually, for something that's complex and really important to be really accurate and precise, or even like learning an instrument. So I haven't heard of that example specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I've heard of the studies where they do like transcranial direct current stimulation to increase language abilities. And I thought they were doing that in the SEALs, as a matter of fact, where your language uptake is 3 or 4 times faster than you would normally have by stimulating certain areas of the brain, which then would accelerate your learning curve amazingly.
If they were using that, they just made me struggle for 3 months of a language I never used. So. So wait, not to go too much in the weeds now, but could you explain how that works?
So they're positive and negative electrical pulses, and it just pulses. It's actually really simple. You can even make a device at home, probably, if you're savvy like that. It's just electrical stimulation on the skull, but it's coordinated with very specific areas of the brain depending on what you're using it for.
Yeah, I built one. I need your help because I built one. And I don't know where to put the electrodes, and I don't want to put them in the wrong place. And I don't want to start by, putting them in experimental places on my brain
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll send you some stuff to help you out.
Leave it to me. I'll get really high and put one of them on my nuts or something. And
Are there a lot of risks or downsides or concerns with that type of tech? Something else?
Yeah, well, the risk is, TDCS and TACS has been around for so long. There's research in the safety efficacy of it, so it's moderately safe as long as you're using it correctly and not too much. But other brain stimulation devices, there's magnetic TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and transcranial ultrasound stimulation that is pretty new and cutting edge. You can't get a home device to do it at home, so it's very much in a clinical setting still, and the safety efficacy is still, that research is still being worked on and stuff like that. So
right.
Yeah, but with the electrical current stimulation, it's pretty safe. Yeah.
We're not talking 1940s electroshock therapy intensity.
No.
Okay. As a layperson,
it doesn't go past the skull, which is why it's so safe, and it's pretty cheap to make.
I was picturing it actually penetrating and mechanically stimulating a part of the brain.
Well, some of the magnetic stuff does, right?
It does, but it doesn't actually hit the brain tissue. So there's maybe the effect of the vibrational waves that hit the skull in that specific location or whatever, but it's not actually penetrating into the brain tissue directly. There's not electricity actually hitting the brain tissue.
Pretty good.
Interesting. Wow. Because I would imagine that if you wanted to affect a brain region, you might have to reach in there with some kind of a signal and tickle something very specific. Because I know that when I talked to Jeff Martin previously, when he was talking about pinpointing areas of the brain, before he would even speak to you about putting anything on your head, you had to have an MRI to understand exactly. Yeah.
So that's ultrasound. That's ultrasound brain stimulation, and I actually went out as a visiting scholar to the University of Arizona and worked side by side with Stuart Hameroff and Jay Sanguinetti of the Center of Consciousness Studies at the U of A, and worked on some of the first ever experiments using ultrasound brain stimulation over there for several months. And Ultrasound is different because it does penetrate the skull. It's really exciting and unique because you can pinpoint and target areas of the brain like the size of a grain of rice, basically.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so they're doing some really interesting stuff, Jay. And then Jay, my friend and colleague, he's teamed up with Shinzen Young, who's, a famous meditation teacher.
Holy cow.
So
Yeah.
they're targeting the area of the brain that's associated with like suffering, human suffering.
And to give you an idea in the audience, she mentioned a name, Shinzen Young, who is a very old meditation teacher, but he is like the meditation teacher of meditation teacher, or the mindfulness teacher of mindfulness teachers. He's like the grand poobah master that all other meditation and mindfulness masters go to for advice on how to break through certain limitations of consciousness within the mind. I've had conversations with that guy. I love him. He is amazing. He is one of the only people in the world who can just kind of keep up with your conversation at the level that you're having it, and then accelerate to the point of him understanding what your understanding is, and then remain in a conversation that is comfortable for you to understand what you're talking about in consciousness expansion and what can happen within the mind and all this other cool stuff. And that's, if they're studying his brain, that's amazingly awesome stuff, because he has done some things with consciousness that is just next level stuff. And it's nothing that he ever had to take drugs for or anything like that. He just conditioned his mind to that point. And what happens because of plasticity, it changes your brain. And so then special people like Lindsay wants to come around and say, hey, let's look at that brain. Let's see what happened to that brain after decades of you doing the right stuff that all these ancient masters have done, and you've become this master. We want to figure out how to reverse engineer that. So what have you experienced by yourself? Like, what kind of technologies have you guinea pigged yourself with in the lab?
I did do the ultrasound a couple times, and I have, some TDCS systems and a VR headset, and yeah, I think one of the areas that's really exciting is the virtual reality. I went down to LA one time and did a demo with this company called Dreamscape, and they were trying to basically start this company which that would be like in movie theaters or malls and stuff, that was like totally immersive VR, where you put on a backpack and gloves and shoes and the headset, and you go into a room with like moving floors, and props and other people and stuff too. And it was like this Disney style like roller coaster ride, and it was
wow,
that's awesome.
You had the actual like sensation, of being on a roller coaster ride. It was so wild. So I think that there's a lot of exciting stuff in VR, and even just that, like the home headset, there's an app called Sound Self where you tone your voice, and it provides feedback, biofeedback with you toning your voice, and it's like a simulated DMT trip based on how you're toning, basically.
Oh my God. That might be overwhelming. That's amazing. I'm talking to Donald Hoffman here in the next week. We're going to do an interview for the show. And he's a big proponent of the fact that, we don't see reality as reality exists, and we build models within our mind based on what our perceptions are of our senses and whatnot. And that what we're seeing is not really reality, but a model of reality. And then once we get beyond that model, sometimes our minds can open up and do amazingly awesome things, and open doors that we didn't even know existed, and open up abilities that we had long lost maybe centuries back as a race, etc. That's this type of thing, though, right? That's using technology to try to unlock these same type of doors, right? Getting into that VR space and seeing what happens when certain things are inserted into your perception. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Totally. Yeah. I'm so excited to see your interview with Donald Hoffman. I'm a big fan of his, and he's good friends with Deepak Chopra, and they've done some interviews and stuff together. And I really enjoy listening to Deepak's take on that too. And because they're so similar, but they come at it from different angles, where this reality is basically a form of a socially induced hallucination of mental constructs.
Right.
And use these types of technologies or whatever to unlock the veils of perception and access that infinite potential of consciousness is totally the direction I see it's going. for example, Adam Gazzelli at UCSF, he has a lab called Neuroscape at UCSF, and he's actually coordinating with the university to start another lab on psychedelics. And so the idea is that the two labs will be like twin towers to each other, doing orthogonal research, to basically look into the technologies that can simulate those psychedelic experiences, so that we can unlock that lens of perceptions in a way where, for the people that don't want to take the psychedelics, that it's still there. It's there whether or not we're on drugs or not.
Well, I'm a big proponent of poking around the brain because, my experience my original consciousness expansion experience was very similar to like all the trip reports that I had read on psychedelics, but at the same time, it was an endogenously sourced compound, whatever it was that assisted my consciousness expansion experience. We call it Enlightenment experience or whatever you want to call it. Whatever word you use pales in comparison to the experience itself, but it was an inside the brain source. It was, meditation only, and whatever happened after that, whatever neurotransmitters were released to assist me in getting through that and seeing, having the perceptions that I had and getting the messages I had or whatever it was all sourced internally. And so I'm a big proponent of poking around the brain to find out how to dump those things out, because I think there might be, like, I've experienced some psychedelics now after the fact, and in comparison, they are kind of a subset of what I got on the endogenous roller coaster ride. And so, I mean, if you mix all of the psychedelics together, and I wouldn't suggest
you get
this
class right here.
I'm not telling you to do this, but if you were to mix like all the psychedelics together in a certain timed release with a certain mixture of cocktail, you could probably get to all of the things that I experienced in Enlightenment without any exogenous psychedelics. But none of the individual psychedelic experiences that I've had, including 5-methyl-oxy, were the full meal deal, where they're whole thing packaged together, where I got piece parts of all the different functionalities of the different psychedelics, all in a different mix in the endogenous experience. So I would.
What you're saying is you've tasted the rainbow, and drugs are the different subsets of the rainbow.
Yes.
Okay.
Very well put. Thank you, sir.
I'm done here. Thank you.
But I mean, if there's a way to do it inside the brain, I think you might be closer to it in your research than just allowing psychedelics. I mean, it's amazing that we have these compounds that are growing naturally on the ground around us out of cow poop and stuff like that take us to meet God. That's amazing. But what would be even more amazing is if we were able to find some type of technology that triggered the button in our brain that allowed us to naturally experience that same type of interface, that same type of experience, and open up our perceptions to what is beyond just the noise in our brain. And so that just intrigues me to no end, to be able to be in that space to where we're now pushing the buttons in the brain to be able to get it to do the things that it doesn't normally do, but that when they do it are amazingly beneficial for the human race and for the individual themselves. Like you've done some experience and some research work and whatnot with therapy assisted ketamine. Is that right? Or you've touched on that, or you were connected with somebody that was doing that?
Yeah, not directly. I'm good friends with Dr. Phil Wolfson, who's the guy who basically wrote the textbook on all the research. He was the first guy to patent all the protocols, and so he's a friend of mine. He lives around the corner. So you might have seen a post that I made. He was looking to hire, and I wasn't that person, but I was helping him.
Oh, okay. You were reaching out into the community to say.
Yeah, he's a friend, but yeah.
So you've heard some anecdotal stories of the people who've been assisted by this kind of stuff, because I'm sitting here at the table with one guy and an alien we have a blow up alien in Ben's seat because he's out today. But both of these guys have experienced positive effects of consciousness expansion and other external compounds that assist in their brain and healing from traumatic brain injury and PTSD and stuff like that. And they've told the stories before. I love that's a possibility, and would love to see that type of thing expand. Let me ask you this question. A lot of times we get the the benefits of an exogenous compound. Do you think these technologies are going to get there someday to the point where we can induce psychedelic-esque experiences and get these people to the same type of mental well-being that psychedelics have proven to deliver?
Yeah, I think that's the goal, definitely. And I can relate to what you were saying earlier, that my most powerful experience in consciousness expanding has been totally sober, actually. And so
With technology, or
no,
okay.
no.
How
Yeah.
does that compare? So this is where I wanted to either ask. I don't know how much technology you've experienced, but so in your endogenous experience, with that being some level of a frame of reference, how does that? I don't even know if it's fair to compare, but how do you contrast or reconcile that versus an experience with the help of some technology?
No comparison at this point. Yeah, absolutely not. Nothing, no psychedelic, nothing I have ever experienced has compared to those experiences.
So how do they compare in any relative way? Like, will a like, if that endogenous experience is an entire hotel, do some of these techs at least let you in one of the rooms? Is that fair?
Yeah,
Yes and no.
maybe. I think that like that's the goal, but I see it, what I'm more interested in seeing in the meantime, like maybe we'll get there eventually, but I think that there's actually some ethical concerns around like the enlightenment button that I have, because there's states, traits, and stages of consciousness in human development, and structures, and there's an organic nature to them, and like a developmental growth, and so what I'm more interested in actually is creating like an ecosystem of a combined approach using different types of technologies, different types of meditation and positive psychology techniques, and whatever they may be. But I see it as more of a combination of things, as a protocol that's actually personalized to where people are at developmentally and experientially. So like maybe they've had a peak mystical experience before, but they're still kind of, maybe they're only 19, so it's not, they might not be ready to for the enlightenment button, and that actually wouldn't be safe without a coach or a therapist to help them get there and make those developmental phase transitions in a safe environment.
That's a really good point. I think a lot of people overlook that really quickly too. Like, no, go do this, and like you'll see the universe. It's like, well, you kind of need a fucking mentor. Like, you need some help realizing you need some integration. You need some help maybe preparing for the steps. And I'm really glad you said that, because I think that gets overlooked really easily.
Yeah, I mean, just from a perspective of, when you go into, like, there's a certain subset of individuals, even on an exogenous compound such as psilocybin, that has an amazingly positive shade of gray that, like, especially from the Johns Hopkins studies, right? You had a third of the people, about 34%, who said it was the most profound experience of their entire life. And then another third of them said, yeah, top 5 and better than a lot of the things that I've experienced in my life. And then another almost third of them said, yeah, it was top 10. It was amazingly positive. But then there was a subset that was like, that fucking sucked. They had a bad trip or whatever. And there's preparation that you can give those folks to say, whatever you're creating in your psychedelic experience is something that's coming from your own subconscious, your own mind. And so whatever is there to help you. It may not be enjoyable, like your experience of, you explained ayahuasca as being drugged through the dirt.
Yeah.
Right. But to be prepared for that being drugged through the dirt, or being prepared for when demons or whatever show up for you, and you don't ask them, what do you have to teach me? Right. You don't realize that you shouldn't resist that. You should lean into it. If you don't get that initial kind of push or guide to say, hey, when bad stuff comes up, lean into it and ask what it has to teach you, or go down the scary set of stairs that has appeared before you, or open the big old scary door that has appeared before you, or whatever that's scaring the living shit out of you. Go through that stuff. Like, if you're not prepared for that, you could have a negative effect. You could have a negative experience and be resistant to the thing the whole time. And if you're resisting, it's not going to teach you what it believes that you need to be taught, even though it's your own subconscious, so to speak. And I know that sounds weird, but we have, from my perspective, we have a small kind of narrow channel of waking awareness, and we're stopped from getting access to the other levels of awareness, because if we had the responsibility for beating every one of our heartbeats, and running our immune system and running our digestive system and running all the subsystems of the human body, we'd be dead in a matter of minutes because we wouldn't be able to handle it all. We have multiple levels of subconsciousness running that show. Well, there's levels of subconscious that have second thoughts on how we handled our last conversation,
Yeah.
right? Or whether or not we made the right decision 4 years ago not to go finish the PhD or whatever it was, right? We have those things that then want to deliver us messages, and a lot of times those lines of delineation are broken down between our waking awareness and our subconscious awareness, which is then where we get a lot of our lessons. But I think that's kind of what's going on in our brain, and a lot of brain scans on psychedelics show that when we're on psychedelics, a lot of the pathways open up, and neighbors who have never spoken to each other are speaking to each other and communicating, and like the psilocybin chart of connectivity in the brain on a placebo is like no one's talking to anybody else. Everybody's doing their own thing. And then when you're on psilocybin, all the folks talk to each other. It's like a block party. Everybody gets together and exchanges information, has a good time, and then teaches you how you've been a douchebag for the last year so that you can then change it. So how close are we on, like, what's the peak experience that you've had in a technological setting, like like a guinea pig setting? Like, what have you tried that has become closer? What have you tried? Like when you did the ultrasound, what was your experience? Like what type of internal experience were you having during that moment?
I wouldn't even really call it a peak experience. I think I'm kind of unique. I'm kind of a unicorn. I would be in that another really small percentage of those experiments where it like doesn't compare to the natural experiences that I've had, because I've been really lucky, I guess, in having a lot of like really, really full on peak mystical experiences with nothing, with no tech and no psychedelics. So it's not really fair for me to say, I think.
I feel your pain.
I think that like when I did the ultrasound, like it got and some other experiences that I've had with TDCS is that it gets, because I am a meditator, I am a regular meditator and have been for a long time. So I feel like I can get, it's like what Shinzen calls the techno boost. Like I can get to a place in my meditation faster than I would if I was just sitting without it. You know, like it might take me like 40 minutes to warm up to really get to like to stabilize that shift in the view of my consciousness as the field of pure awareness, you know, and really be able to hold it in a place of emptiness. But with the tech, I might be able to do it in like a couple minutes, or with the ultrasound, maybe 60 seconds, you know, with TDCS, maybe 10 minutes, you know, so it's like a boost. And the benefit of doing that is if you're a regular meditator, like when you shift from the sense of self as a mental construct to the sense of self as the field of pure awareness, and then the sense of self totally dissolves. When you're able to hold that for a lot faster and then longer, you start to have novel experiences of emptiness itself. And so that's the benefit. And that Shinzen talks about that too, that there's like when because he does ultrasound on a regular basis, that he's had the most novel experiences in meditation with the ultrasound than without it. You know, it's kind of like going to a 10-day Vipassana retreat, right? You have like day 3 is kind of like the threshold, and you start to really like really expand, and then it gradually deepens into that 10 days, and then at the like day 9 or 10 you're like, holy shit, you know, it doesn't even exist anymore, you know. But maybe that would be within a couple hours on the ultrasound or something like that. So that's the benefit, is you can really go deeper, further, and faster, I think.
Well, we need to find a place where we can have Jeff hook us up and zap our brains. You know, that rings true to a lot of the things that I've heard too, because I heard a lifelong Zen meditator and a Zen master, Zen monk, who got into a flotation tank and reported that he'd gone deeper than he'd ever gone, like deeper and quicker than he'd ever gone before in the meditation sensory deprivation tank. Because if you've never been in a tank, basically, I've got one downstairs in the garage. It creates a lukewarm skin temperature water that removes, like right now, if you're paying attention, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it or whatever, you don't notice because your body is normalized. But if you think about it, you can feel the pressure of you sitting in whatever chair or standing or walking around doing whatever. You can feel the delineation between the skin and you move your hands around, you can feel the air moving. It's like you feel where you end. And that helps build a sense of self for you that then creates your emotional landscape or helps create your emotional landscape, et cetera. But when that thing dissolves, when you're in a tank of water that is at perfect skin temperature, and you cannot, after a few minutes, you cannot feel the water anymore, you cannot feel the edges of your existence anymore, and it allows for a potential expansion out into infinity. And Zen masters got into float tanks and reported they'd gone deeper and quicker than they ever had. I would love to find out the results of, like, if Shinzen's saying that he can go deeper and faster than he has previously with the assistance of this technology. I mean, that's like, you know, excuse the metaphor, but I'm getting a hard on about that. You know, it's like, that's
nuts.
It's amazing that as somebody who's spent their life in practice of mindfulness and meditation and understanding the human mind and the movements of the human mind and how it can create pain and suffering on a large scale, both in the individual and in societal structures, et cetera, and cultural influences, to have him say something like that is substantial. It's amazing. It's like, wow. And does that give you like a feeling of hope that you're on the right track, of this type of technology is going to help the world?
Totally. Yeah. I see it from multiple angles. I think it is really exciting and really promising because, you know, there's this thing Adam Gazelli calls the cognition crisis, where we're on an exponential curve of mental health crisis, where, you know, teen suicide rates and Alzheimer's and dementia and depression and anxiety, and especially now with coronavirus, like that exponential curve is like even crazier, you know?
Yeah.
And so we're not going to be able to flatten that curve of the psychological mental health cognition crisis if only humans were to help humans, right? We don't have enough institutions and organizations to train people to help humans, right? That it just wouldn't be viable. And so to like flatten that curve or even close the gap of human suffering, we actually do need technology to get it to the masses, to everyone and everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But there are also, I see some risks and some concerns and like a need for ethical parameters to be set up, you know, like I mentioned earlier. So I do have, like, it's like, yeah, there's a crisis, but there's this African proverb, you know, that says like, in times of crisis, let us slow down, you know? And so
I love that.
especially with all these technologies that stimulate the brain, it's like, well, if we stimulate this area of the brain and we do the safety parameters and research around the safety, but we're not looking and not doing the research for, if we stimulate that part of the brain, which part of the brain is it downregulating?
Right.
You know, why would we do research on that? Because we live in a capitalistic, you know, society. So we're not going to like look into all of the risks necessarily just to know that it's safe enough to continue to do and bring it to market. But we're not thinking about how, when we alter the brain at the level of the tissue, like how it might affect, you know, when we have a kid, or like the next generation or the next generation, or even like a species differentiation between the class systems if it's really expensive and things like that. So there are, I think, ethical parameters that need to be set up, which I believe they will be.
Yeah.
Blindness.
And I believe you, and I agree with you that, you know, we need to set those things up because, like you said, you know, push button enlightenment is amazing if you're all full of rainbows and unicorns and you know, all that positive side of life. But on the other side, you know, you cannot, like, just like you don't want to give psychedelics to someone with schizophrenia who would, you know, may go off the deep end and exacerbate any issues or instabilities that they have, giving them the tools to just lose it completely forever. You want to make sure that the push button enlightenment doesn't get to those types of folks, of course, but you also want to make sure the push button enlightenment doesn't go to somebody who's maybe not quite ready for it. And or it might create an instability, or, you know, anybody who doesn't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex, right? So anybody 21 and younger shouldn't be experiencing with this kind of technology. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that needs to go into that before you can say it's safe for someone to hook themselves up to a machine and then come out enlightened, so to speak. Although I'm not sure we've ever gotten to that level. I mean, it sounds like you've had some endogenous experiences where you understand how deep that well goes, and I have as well. And, you know, both of us are saying a natural type of a consciousness expansion experience is much more profound than any individual psychedelic that we've experienced. But that doesn't say that we can't eventually get there with the right cocktail or the right technology to replicate exactly what happened in the human body for us naturally, which I think is built there as a guidepost to keep us on the straight and narrow of not completely losing it to the ego as we develop as human beings. I don't know. Doug, what do you got?
I want to play with some tech now.
So what do you got, Lindsay? Are you still in that space? Are you just kind of keeping up with everybody else's technologies, or do you have experiments of your own that you're contemplating?
Yeah, I'm pretty much keeping up with everyone else's technology and keeping close ties with my colleagues, and I also work with my clients. So my clients are kind of like my guinea pigs, and so I experiment with the cocktail. And I've developed a really good knack for assessing like where people are at, like on the what Jeffrey would call the continuum of non-symbolic experience, like where they're at, and what if they need to make the transition, how they need to make that transition into a persistent awakened state, and if they already have made the transition, like where they're at and how to deepen it with what techniques and stuff. And
Could you give us an example of this?
Technologies, along with gold standard meditation and positive psychology techniques and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
that's cool. My research.
That's
so. My question is, could obviously without like any too specific details, but could you give us an example of like maybe someone that comes to you and how you have helped them, maybe like how they hit a wall, but then you found a window? Do you have an example maybe you could share that might tie what we've been discussing kind of together?
Yeah, the first client that comes to mind is a business executive. He owns like a huge multinational company, and he came to me, originally like a year and a half ago, thinking he was so stressed out, he was either going to have a heart attack or end up in a mental institution. I mean, he was just like really, really stressed out. And since then, like within a matter of like 3 to 4 months, had like a full-on spiritual awakening, and totally shifted his lens of how he does business itself, right? Like what his entire value system changed. And so how he approached business changed, and he was doing great. And then the coronavirus happened, and he was having a really hard time focusing, so then I gave him the brain driver, and he used it for focus, and that helped. And then he was having a really hard time just adjusting to the new life. Like he wasn't able to travel to the different company locations anymore, and he really, he was stuck at home with his family, and so it was really stressful. And so I just like through talking about where he was at, I just identified like a meditation technique to really just empty that stress and all of that mental contact, to get him back to, because he had this peak experience of like discovering universal love. Like it was so beautiful. Like he said that he never knew that a universal love even existed.
right.
Like it was like that whole concept was new to him until he had experienced it in his body himself. And so I was able to kind of attune him, like once he discovered it, and then he had some wobbles, and just kind of like I helped him attune with techniques, and experimenting with combining very specific techniques. Like if someone's really down, then you want to increase the ante of the positive psychology, like every morning and every night when you wake up and go to sleep, reminding yourself of your goals, saying a little prayer, whatever it is, and maybe laying off on the meditation. So boost your well-being and your self-esteem.
Right.
And then layer in like a new meditation technique that might be a little bit more advanced. And then with the brain driver, so that's like one example of like a combined approach.
If I ever go sideways mentally, I'm coming to see you. One of the things that you said, though, brings up a really good point, in that anybody who's new to this conversation or new to this type of consciousness expansion experimentation, an experience really is required from my perspective, in that when your sense of self is written within your mind itself, it's written at a subconscious level. Like the body, when your sense of self is inclusive of your body and inclusive of your family and friends and yada, 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 it's because of how you feel about those people that the oxytocin dump occurs, and then a connection can be made between you and someone else that then becomes a portion of your sense of self, et cetera. But that's an experiential thing. It's always an experiential thing that if you wind up loving the Chicago Cubs, for instance, I'm wearing Chicago Cubs gear today. There was an experience that I had with the Cubs and a feeling that I had with the Cubs and a feeling that I had with my friends. And it was the feeling. It was the experience inside that wound up mating the idea of the Cubs with my sense of self, that I held on to it long enough to wear some gear, post expansive experiences, whatever it was. But that experience itself is the thing that writes your sense of self and creates a difference of who you were yesterday to who you were today and tomorrow. And I think, that's important to understand, that you can't read yourself into this space. You can't watch videos yourself into this space. You can't listen to the greatest speakers on the planet talk about this stuff and wind up in this space. You really do have to have that internal experience of the love, for instance, with your executive client there, to create that shift and create that shift in your sense of self, that shift in your perception of how you see things, et cetera, which then changes your life. But it's always the experience that does that. And, the technologies that we're talking about here are, on that path, I think. What else have you experienced that you've been impressed with, or some of the work that you've seen that's maybe in the hopper that we haven't heard about? What's going on out there on the left coast?
Well, actually, as far as technology, I just remembered as you were talking, another technology that I think I would have to say was actually more powerful for me than the ultrasound is the Vilight. So my friend's Dr. Sanjay Manchetta, he is a clinician, a psychologist, and he has a custom-made Vilight. So the Vilight is a helmet, and it's infrared brain stimulation. So It's just infrared on a helmet with frequencies. You put like a laser up your nose too. So you have the helmet, and then you have one up your nose, and you can change the frequency. And he has a clinical grade one that was custom made for his clinical practice. He's been doing this kind of stuff for so long, and I tried his, and he boosted it way up, almost as high as it could go.
Oh, I got Lindsay in the chair. Let me crank this to 11.
And I think that was actually, I remember, I had forgotten about this, but I remember I did it a bunch of times actually, and it lasted. It wasn't just in during the meditation. It lasted for several hours, or for the rest of the day, where I was in this heightened state. If I were to use Jeffrey's location framework of awakening, there's different locations where you deepen in your experience. And if I'm typically at a location 3, then the Vilight boosted me to a location 4.5, and it lasted in a temporary state, for the rest of the day.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's really neat. So that's
he's doing some research. He might be fun to talk to too. He just got an IRB approved to do some actual research with participants and stuff. So that'll be interesting too. But right now, all the research that's been done on it, it is a commercial device. You can buy it at home, and it's being promoted for treating Alzheimer's and dementia, actually. And actually, the best research on it that's being done for Alzheimer's is in a combined approach. This is what I'm talking about with the protocols, is combining the Vilight with neurofeedback actually helps with the Alzheimer's. So
wow, that's amazing. And you're talking about the protocols that it can include exogenous compounds such as psilocybin, which is now being proven to be a great compound to grow brain cells in neurogenesis, where you can add technology to something that says, hey, I'm going to go grow some new brain cells, and then the technology says, and we're going to awaken those as soon as they pop into existence.
Yeah, totally. I'm working as a consultant for this company, Enuma, that's not public yet, but it's a virtual reality company, and it was designed actually by as a group virtual reality experience to stimulate a psilocybin journey in a group experience. And they had a physicist and big psychedelic researcher as advisors, or they do, and so it kind of stimulates the field, all these geometries in the field, and you can touch these little nodes and play with them in the group. And they're actually going to be doing research where they combine psychedelics with the virtual.
I was just going to say that as a joke, but that's amazing. I was trying to picture what that would be like in your actual mind. I cannot imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's kind of it's interesting. I mean, this is totally my industry, and it's totally
That's so
what
cool.
I
You're in a really
do,
cool
but
industry.
Also, when I'm personally on psilocybin, I like to be out in nature, like at the beach,
Mhm.
like with the trees and stuff. So
Yep.
it'll be
Yeah, it's really an outside edible.
Yeah.
You know, or if you eat it inside, get outside as soon as possible.
Yeah, there's just something about being inside. We're just like, I gotta get the fuck out
I
of
don't
here.
know. I want to put on a virtual reality headset.
All right, so what's next for TransTech? Like, where's it going? Is it a lot of brain stimulation that will wind up being able to pick up at Best Buy on the shelves eventually once it's all approved for safe use and whatnot? Or is this something that's going to remain in a psych lab at the left coast and places that are experimenting on that kind of stuff?
Probably a little bit of both, just like it is now. Like you can get the Vilite, but you can't get the clinical grade of Vilite, at least not yet. And so it's a slow process. And I value the slow process. And some people, want to just go off to other countries where things aren't regulated and bring them to the market.
Are you saying this isn't Botox?
So, and there's like one side to that where it's like, yeah, people are suffering and people need it, but then there's also like, well, let's make sure this is being done in an ethical way and consideration to not just our generation, but the future generation. So that's kind of my take on it. So I guess, yeah, a little bit of both. And the pieces that I shared with you, I think are where the research is at. That's really the cutting edge. And if you really want to experience it, you should go down to Tucson to the University of Arizona, and I'll introduce you to Jay Sanguinetti, and you can hang out with Shinzen over there.
Okay,
That's
done.
awesome.
We'll put it on the schedule. I mean, literally as soon as COVID, travel restrictions are reduced, we're gonna go.
As soon as they'll allow us.
Alzheimer's.
What about TBI patients?
TBI, yeah, I was working with TBI patients over there.
Well, there you go. We got one of those sitting right across the table. So, if you have links, if you have ways for people to get a hold of you, what would those be?
It's just my name, lindsaybriner.com, and there's a contact form if you want to reach out or just check out what I'm doing.
Nice. So if you're an executive looking for some assistance of dealing with what COVID has done to your 2020 and you want to change your 2021, definitely look Lindsay up online and drop her a line and see what her schedule's all about. See if she has some time to fit you in. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's been such an amazing talk on trans technology and on consciousness expansion. And you're part of the family. I want to have you on again. We'll talk about the larger scope of consciousness expansion and how to deal with that stuff next time. You got anything else for us?
No, thank you so much, Sean. I realize that you are just like the perfect person to be talking to, because you can cover every topic that I intersect. So it's really fun.
Let's not start any nasty rumors.
Yeah, his head still has to fit through the door. So.
Well, we love the time we had with you, and we'll put the links up to your contact information on the videos and the website and stuff like that. And thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Sean.
All right. If you guys want to reach out to Lindsay, the contact information is linked. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons, the share and comment and all that stuff helps the algorithms. Thank you for that effort. We love you guys. Don't forget to support us on Patreon. It's patreon.com/TSAW. Talk to you soon. Peace.